Hello, hi. Oh, waving my coffee cup at you, but the software is cutting it out. But here you are, now you can see. How lovely. Well, hello. Knowledge, knowing, and strategy. You can't have a series of discussions about Gregory Bateson perhaps teaching strategy, and how would he do it, without trying to understand the relationships between what's usually called knowledge management, and strategy. Except I'm going to be arguing for knowing rather than knowledge. And I'm going to leave the word strategy here in the title, but actually the process is strategizing. That is to say, the ongoing process of doing stuff strategically. Ah, there's a giggle. Never mind. We'll get away with it. Where have these things come from? Well, this little piece is based on lectures that I was giving in 2013, I think, long time ago, in Nottingham Business School. This particular set of stuff I used with with doctoral students initially, and then with full-time master students. The sources, knowing in firms. For me, the principal author in this set of readings is George von Krogh. I really like his work. He introduces the idea of autopoiesis, AUTOPOESIS. I haven't made provision in here in what I'm doing here to explain autopoiesis, but we do use it. I think you'll find an explanation of autopoiesis, like most things, on Wikipedia. But basically, autopoiesis refers to a system that replicates itself, okay? Reproduces itself. Autopoiesis. Strategy is about making sense of where you think you are, constructing a sense of your environment. We really cannot be thinking about knowledge, know-how, knowing, strategy without referring to Weick and his sense-making in organizations. Weick has made a career, an academic career, out of the notion of sense-making. And what he has to say makes a lot of sense. Enabling knowledge creation. You can see a little graphic straight out of Amazon from when I bought my own copy. Look at the authors, von Krogh and Nonica. I keep saying it, don't I? I really like their work. I really adore their work. I think it was fabulous. And to me at the time that it was written and I first read it, it seemed brave. Arguing and Thinking, a Rhetorical Approach to Social Psychology. Michael Billig. Interesting guy. He lectured, he worked just down the road at Loughborough. You know where all the students are in Loughborough University, and they all come to Nottingham for their nightlife. Sorry, I can't resist these little asides. It's very unprofessional. Anyway, Billig is following this fundamental idea that reality is socially constructed, socially construed. We make up what we think of the world through our relationships, our conversations, and our dialogues. So Arguing and Thinking is his treatise or monograph, as they put there, about this process. He makes one major contribution to our thinking, which merits the idea of being here. And that is, we can't take things for granted. And what I mean by that is, sorry, we cannot take what somebody says. Susan, whopping the camera. I mean, the microphone. We cannot take what somebody says for granted, because we always hold implicitly or explicitly some sense of context. Right? And what Billig does is, although he doesn't use the word context, he uses the expression what's in the foreground and what's in the rear ground. Okay. The elements of our conversation which are being foregrounded do have, as part of their source of meaning, a background, a rear ground. So to be, I can express this, I was going to say, to thoroughly understand what somebody is trying to tell us, to acquire the sense that somebody is attempting to give, we have to understand both the foreground and the rear ground. I suppose in a sense, if you want to, that gives you a direction of their argument. But this idea of foreground and rear ground, which I don't mention explicitly, again, is pretty fundamental to the things that we're talking about. These books in the period 2000-2010 were not having a big impact on business school agenda. We were still strategy as position, very much so, reacting perhaps and accommodating, competing for the future, which I've mentioned elsewhere. Hamel and Prahalad. So the notions of competence were beginning to emerge, but they were still very much second fiddle to this recipe which was being promulgated by business schools in how to do strategy. Okay, let's go on. This is almost pure Bateson. It's not a question or an exercise from Bateson, but it's just a classic of the kind of things he would get up to. So these are the original slides, by the way. So having just given that introduction to a class, the next thing I would put up is I wonder which comes first, the chicken or the egg. The reactions in the classes were always amazing, always amazing. Sometimes it was just pure shock. Sometimes there was a giggle. Sometimes oh, bloody hell, what's that got to do with the price of fish, as they would say in Newcastle. But which comes first, the chicken or the egg? What would your response be? And how would you approach it? Oh, so we have a little character that we might argue with. Actually, this is a clue. What Bateson would be looking for, what I was looking for, was to move away from which comes first, the chicken or the egg. And in a sense, treat this as a question of, I wonder which comes first, a chicken or an egg. It's almost, I don't quite know why that language works differently and switches so fast, but there's a real difference between the two questions. I wonder which comes first, the chicken or the egg. I wonder which comes first, a chicken or an egg. Systemically, an egg is the way that a chicken reproduces. No, it isn't. Well, it is, but it is also a chicken is the way an egg reproduces itself. These are systemically equivalent systems, equivalent processes, same thing. So why is it if I say to you that a chicken is an egg's way of reproducing, you go, bleh, or most people go, bleh, chicken-like sound. Why is it that we pay attention to the chicken as opposed to the egg? Well, the first reason is indicated here. If this poor boy could put down his PC for a moment and stop playing, then maybe we would have more eggs. One chicken to many eggs. One egg, one chicken. Not only that, in terms of food value, the chicken is worth a hell of a lot more. One goose cooked for Christmas. So, having played with that for a while, and in a sense, through doing that, laid down a pattern, we give the class this task: working in small groups. Take 10 minutes, please. Or somebody to act as a reporter, reporter. Which comes first, knowledge or strategy? And I'm as or more interested in your reasoning than I am in your answer as to which one comes first. You might like to pause, take a few moments to have a think about what your answer might be. One of the things here in all of this work, in thinking about strategy, strategizing, knowledge, know-how, and doing it in a way that Bateson might be teaching strategy, is review, reflection, debriefing, as I've called it somewhere else. How has your team approached this task? I asked the question, what did your team do exactly? And what I mean by that is, I really want to know what the conversation was, whether anybody tried to act something out, express their ideas in more than just speech. If they did speak, what was it they said? You can recall the turn and turn about in the conversation and track the conversation. That would be really, really powerful. Why is that? Well, I don't want big descriptive words that hide what was going on in the real of the conversation. I don't want, well, we had a careful discussion with the chairman and due process, and we took minutes and blah, blah, blah. You know, I didn't ever get that in the answer, but well, we talked it through and we decided that is not what did your team do exactly. What was the nature of the conversation? Who led the conversation? What were their propositions? So we try and pull that out in some detail, and we want to do that because of the next question. Can you identify any assumptions that you made? Or in a different language, can you identify presuppositions? I have to confess, I've never been very, very clear in myself of what presuppositions are. Bateson uses them a lot. I'm aware in some discussions of language and language use, there are presuppositions, there are assumptions, and these things are different, and they lead to different outcomes. I'm sorry, I just have to say to you that an assumption, a presupposition, to me like this, they're so, I can't distinguish, it's an important word, I can't distinguish between them. So anyway, what are the assumptions? What are the assumptions that have been made? What are the presuppositions that have been made? What is it that you have taken for granted during your discussion? One of the, one way of thinking about this is that assumptions and presuppositions operate like constraints, and they limit the form of the argument, the direction of the argument. They rule some things as being out of bounds, unquestionable, unchallengeable. And so we are trying to get the students to recognize or see what those are. Why? Well, which comes first, a chicken or an egg? Are you able to identify a process at work, or are you making an assumption? Have you made a presupposition that knowledge is a thing, that strategy is a thing, and one thing comes before the other thing? Which is the question that was posed, apparently. We then asked the team if they can identify the reasoning or logic that they were using. And then to recap and round it off, I ask, what did you argue about? By argument, I mean argue, as opposed to the academic argument. There is that, but that's really in the bullet point before. Were there animated arguments? Very animated discussions? If so, about what? Now, autopoiesis in knowledge and knowledge management. Cognitivist and connectionist. Long words. Von Krogh lays out these profiles of the way in which we understand knowledge. And the first one is this one, the cognitivist. This profile is probably the one which was in use in most teams when they were dealing with the question on the previous slide. It is the rational view of knowledge. It's the view of logic. It certainly is a view of knowledge that goes with management science and with efficiency. It certainly is the view of knowledge built into the kind of physics that I did when I was a kid, a long time ago. It's the kind of knowledge and consequential know-how which is present in the physical forms of engineering, mechanical engineering, production engineering, or manufacturing engineering. Sorry, I'm just doing a mental check as to whether or not I'm making sense, but I am. I'm sure I am. Organization works like a mainframe computer. It's open to information. Information gets in, it's collected, stored centrally, and the mainframe, so to speak, of top management steers the organization. Centralist. The environment is outside, it's external, it's pre-given, it's preordained. Was preordained? Yeah, preordained. The problem for the business is to understand what it is, and to adapt to it. I'll let you read on. I'm just scanning down to see if I can time it so that it's the same sort of as you would read it. The knowledge development element is important. The cognitivist profile develops knowledge through assimilation, putting things together, dissemination, sharing it, of all the incoming information, which can get in and is valid. So I'm saying it can get in and it is valid. And then the way we represent that to ourselves within the business does or doesn't match that outer world. If it does, we're likely to be successful. If it doesn't, we're likely not to be successful. Right, so a cognitivist profile. Ooh, sorry, there you go. Strategy is position, the map, the territory, all of that stuff, the management of change, to reconfigure the business, to meet the challenges of this environment, all comes from this. Well, if we take that for a while, we do have to understand how easy it is to make mistakes. This is an orienteering exercise, more experiential learning for the students. And they go out and identify points. This is 3D. They get 50 points if they do this, if they retrieve the message, that is, by this tree. And they're looking for a solitary tree, 150 meters northeast down the hill from the junction of in the footpath. Why are they looking there? In a way, it doesn't matter which profile of knowledge you have. This is just such a fundamental mistake. But this is not a solitary tree. No point in looking. But they spend ages looking at it and discussing it. It happens that this group of trees is in roughly the right place, but only roughly, not the tree. There's more trees, there's bigger tree, more noticeable, but not the tree on its own. Here's another exercise. This one's interesting. I've only got one photograph of this, and I don't have any video, which is a shame. But anyway, this is the exercise. There are 3 red poles. One is A, one is B, one is C. There are 4 red boards stacked at A. The boards are different sizes, smallest on top, largest at the bottom. The task is to move the boards from A to C. Now, a board can only be on a pole or being carried in transit. Only one board may be in transit at any time. No board must ever rest on a smaller board. You may not move the poles, and you may not move the boards during the planning time. 45 minutes to plan the task. And then the winning team is the one that does it shortest, quickest. Which is interesting. He says in the most boring way, sorry. Why is this one more interesting? Well, from a knowledge point of view, it is seeking out different things in the team. There we go. One piece in progress. So the guys have got a plan, and so the people who are the runners, and they're running because of the time penalty, or the shortest route, shortest moves, shortest time combination. Now then, the connectionistic profile has a different view of knowledge. In this view, knowledge is a resident in individuals. It's not an external entity. So individuals carry know why, know how, know what. Therefore, what is available as choices that are created, as processes that are designed or could be adopted, as action sequences of what to do, what's available is dependent on the relationships between these individuals who carry the knowledge. Now, what happens? The organization, virtual or otherwise, consists of individuals who are connected. And in this context, this connection for von Krogh in his writing is in virtual organizations connected by information technology. But other than taking into account the constraints of the routes through the information technology, it's the same in a real group. The pattern of relationships, who works comfortably with who, the nature of the conversations, the style of the conversation, the antagonism or friendliness or affection, the conversations, the flexibility to have different kinds of conversations, all of these things to elicit and construct sensible dialogue. These are important in the connectionistic profile. In terms of understanding the environment, because different groups are working in different locations, it's likely that different views of the environment emerge within the organization. If you go back to the connectivist profile, disaster. But here, these differences are seen as opportunities to adapt, to differentiate in different ways. And it's actually, in a sense, enhancing the ability to adapt. So knowledge resides in the connections of experts, is problem solution orientated, has a foreground and a rear ground. We want to solve this problem because of, so it's contextualized. And knowledge is dependent on the state of the network. I'll let you read knowledge development. It's local. That's the interesting thing. It's local. And then this last part, truth. Different experts who have accumulated information about different parts of the objective reality bargain about the truth. I'm fascinated by this bargain. This is the recognition of some socio-political process going on, rather than just a cold argue about the truth, which is right and which is wrong. So I think this probably is much more the way in which students were looking at the towers of Haklo. When we look at their leanings, their learnings, through some of the feedback that we would get in debriefing, very headline, not really as detailed as I hope they undertook in their debriefing discussions. But the headlines of what they have been paying attention to. I don't like good leadership, and I would have criticized them for that. I would have said to them, do you understand what you mean by that? What is it? And how would you specify it? The bonding, yes. Everybody contributing, yes. What's up? Patient and determination. And then I'm curious about this last one. Worked out the answer afterwards. A lot of that happens in organizations. A lot of that happens in strategy. Making sense after the event. Why do I say that? The whole notion of a competence in strategy and strategic thinking is that we worked it out afterwards. We saw what it was that really led to success, and therefore that was the competence. So these are the competences we need to identify and look for. Working it out afterwards. Okay, in the action phase, what happened? What do you remember? Well, let's review all of this. When we asked them to review those reflections at, let me just restate it, what happened is we are trying to draw out from them, this is a terrible thing, isn't it? Evidence of an autopoietic process rather than a rational process, rather than a cognitivist process. Let's explore why. The traditional way of thinking of things, we want to know why we're going to do something. What is the reason? When we know what the reason is, and the results are that we're going for, because that's the reason, we know how to do it. And because we know how to do it, we know specifically what actions are required. And that's a rational or a cognitivist view. The students will often dress up in their headlines. They will dress up their reportage in these terms. When you dig, so to speak, into their dialogue and their discussion, you come to realize, or if we ask them to inquire and recognize, they start off with how you do something. What's a common practice? What has been socialized into their groups and their teams? What have they shared? The next thing that they reflect on, what's the context and what's the purpose? Because their understanding of context, their presuppositions, their assumptions about the context or the purpose, that drives their notion of why they're doing something. And these two things, why we're doing it, how we do this, engenders the knowledge what to do. And also engenders the knowledge of what to feed back. What do I mean by that? Well, when we ask for a review, if we are using this as an exercise to reflect on some theory or some stuff which has already been taught, then they will attempt to give us feedback. Well, we know what to do because we know the theory, why to do it. We therefore understand the techniques of what to do. And then we do that. Whereas if you dig into the process of how they were handling the exercise and what it is they were learning from doing the exercise, there's a different set of answers. Autopoietic view, why are you doing it? To learn. What have you learned about your common practice and what is socialized? What might you do differently in the way in which you approach how things are thought about and how things are done? Somewhat different. Anyway, so the autopoietic view, the rules and protocols of conversation in the team determine what is known by the team. Why? How's that come about? Well, first of all, the organization. It's an observing system. The organization is something which scans the environment, but it scans the environment for particular things. Information about those things which are scanned for will be taken in and treated as data and important. And those things which are there and are offering information, news of difference, as Bateson would call it, if they're not scanned for, if they're not seen as concerns, they will just be missed. The organization is actually closed in the broader sense. It's only open to the things which people deem to be important. Where does that importance come from? It comes from the conversations within the organization. And it comes from the conversations about what we're doing in the organization, how we do stuff in the organization, where we're doing it, why we're doing it, what we're doing it for, what information we have about the environment, why we're using that information in the environment, why it matters. So in this sense, the environment, brackets as known and understood, co-evolves with the development, with the evolution of the organization itself. So you've got one thing, if you like, discovering another thing. One problem leads to another problem because as you know how and solve one problem, you recognize there's another problem. So the whole thing is co-evolving. Knowledge is in mind, body, and social system. Now remember, in the Connectionist profile, knowledge is essentially seen as being in the individual. Here we acknowledge a know-how, a process, a procedure, which embeds routines to accomplish things, but they are embedded in the organization and may not be completely known and understood by individuals. Individuals act within that process. Oh, John, that doesn't make sense. How could that happen? Well, I'd like you to think back of being at school. And can you recognize that when it was playtime at school, and in the UK, we'd all rush outside into the quadrangle, to play. Every playtime, the same games would emerge in the same parts of the playground, the quad. Certainly at my senior school, the quad was zoned. There was the year 5 area, year 4, year 3, and another part of the playground where the quad was for oiks. Oh dear, I don't know. The girls would have their skipping ropes. And they'd always skip in the same place and get very, very upset if football intruded. But even if you go back to junior school, you still see the same things, the same game that's emerging, the same games of tag, or the same games of British Bulldog, because of course I went to school in the UK. How did that happen? Well, it happened because the friendship groups have their little rules and ways of doing things. The rules of the game are known. Whose game is it? Depends on which individual started the game off and said, let's play. Blah, blah, blah. And you'd also then realize that there's slight variations according to whose game it is. Because there are two things. You have to know whose game it is. If you want to join in, say, can I play? And they go ask Fred. It's his game. So Fred will give you permission to join the game. And you'd also have to respect Fred's rules. If there was an appeal as to whether or not a rule was broken, because it's Fred's game, Fred was the arbiter. Right. Okay. An organization, formal or informal, has a capacity for processes and procedures which exist, which function, deliver tasks, accomplishments, but may not be known or recognized by people in the organization, everybody in the organization. Sorry, not all of that process, procedure, accomplishment thing is known and understood by people in the organization. Knowledge development. And this might take a moment or two to unpack. Let's take this first sentence backwards. Knowledge is developed in and through or by conversations. Those conversations are about creating an interpretation of incoming information or data. Remember, information is news of difference. The differences which are created, which are identified in those conversations as they discuss the news that's coming in, construct in people's thinking new distinctions. But those distinctions are based on what's been experienced before. Knowledge is only developed if difference is identified. Knowledge is only developed if that difference that's identified is seen as valuable. A distinction enables us to do something. And it only matters if we're then able to apply it to the environment or to reconfiguring the organization. You have to be thinking all the time, what's evolving in the organization is reflected or comes from the environment. What we notice about the environment causes changes in the way in which we think or we operate within the organization. It causes us to see things differently in the environment. So the whole thing's blah, 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 interactive. Truth doesn't matter. Well, at least it's not the main issue. If we accept that there's not an objective reality, we can create different standpoints. And through experimentation from those different standpoints, we can identify, purposefully try out new things. And if they work, we get the results that we anticipated. We have new possibilities for the organization. If they don't work, boom. The reality that we speak of and deal with is created socially within the organization. It's not preordained, it's not pre-given. It is just one great big messing. Why do I say messing? Well, because I was going to say it's just one great big mess, but it's not a static mess. With all the discussions and debates about the ecology and the changing ecology of Earth, there's no way we should be thinking that the environment is static. It's just one great big dynamic system. And we, as human beings, are dealing with a small part of it and messing with a small part of it. The trouble is, we're often messing with a small part of it that makes a big difference. But that's another lecture, another story, another discussion. So, well, they start to work in different teams. Now, oh, it's all unfamiliar. There are different conversational practices. There are different conversational rules. It's somebody else's game all of a sudden. We have to adapt in our thinking, and we have a choice. We either deny what comes from the other teams, or we adapt and integrate that into our thinking. And that, of course, changes our perception of the environment. I like this slide. This slide is a mini set of rules of how you live with autopoiesis and contribute. So what's missing? Are there any key words from our discussion which aim on this piece of feedback? This is the sort of stuff that the students love to throw out to prepare. And sometimes as a facilitator, you're kind of, wow, yes. Yeah, I really like that. But then when I put this in our conversation here, what were the highlights? How were those highlights identified? What is it which is being, in Billig's terms, foregrounded, and what's rear-grounded? If there's a sense of impact or influence, what are the highlights which are influencing or impacting the activities? Or, because from an autopoiesis point of view, the activities would throw up things which are highlighted, but those highlights, the things that we go for as being high, are actually constructed in the team. So this notion of teamwork or team working, which I would cross out and speak about the dynamics of the team and the conversations and the way in which those conversations are held, and how the team members treat each other, then you've got an influencing of change. It's important to recognize that this particular slide was produced on a team building event at the start of a master's program. So for these teams, back there then, as they were, the development of friendship and relationships which they might be able to rely on through the next year of their master's program Yeah, that makes sense. That is important. That is important. But for our purposes here, not so. But what we might put in there is the openness of the relationships and the dialogues within the organization, and the way in which conflict is handled and processed out in the organization. Because from the view that we've been speaking of, if you have closed groups within the organization, or warring factions, or little empires, you are constructing an organization within an organization within an organization, or you're constructing competing organizations looking to attract or achieve or dominate the same resources. But they're in competition with each other. And so you'll have errors, or errors? No, I can't say that, can I? You will have an inaccurate, insufficient transfer of know-how and data, information, news of difference about the environment. So there's a few things wrong with this rather nice piece of feedback for our purposes here. News of difference. There is a sense in which location matters in strategy or strategic thinking, but it's very much metaphoric. Where we think we are and what we think we're doing and why it is we've agreed that that is significant. These are local things from our local team. And that is part of what we call the setup. And it's from the setup that we scan, we go out to find things. We retrieve news of difference about the organization, about the environment. This idea is really, really significant. We go out and retrieve stuff. What we retrieve, socially constructed. Or what we go looking for, was socially constructed. The what message we bring back depends on the news of difference we identify. That is to say, the way in which we're scanning, the tools, the concepts, the ideas, the techniques that we're using for scanning. What it means, the sense we make of it, is a personal and shared and social and interpersonal. What we take away from things, so let's go the other way again. It depends on the way in which we access experiences. Yeah. How do you remember what you remember? How do you put it together and plug it together? The cognitivist view of knowledge is really kind of safe. The knowledge lumps are independent of you, they're independent of others. Once you've got a lump, it's reliable. But it ain't like that. It ain't like that. Put it crudely. if yeah, I've seen this happen actually. If your sales director is in constant argument with the director of marketing, there's not going to be a good information flow about the market space. News of difference will be falsely constructed as a manifestation of the tensions in the relationship. News of difference may be falsely reported. News of difference may be seen as totally blah, 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 blah. And I saw some of this when I was working out in the working out with our sales reps in the cycle industry. We were promoting some new models, new bikes, and the marketing department had created some product stories which really nicely matched their ambition to see ladies' bikes, which is the largest segment of the market, being seen as and matched into fashion. So a lot of energy and effort was going into product placement in fashion shoots and articles and stuff like that in women's magazines. The bicycle industry and the cycle industry is difficult to communicate with your customers because large segments of the customer base just don't share, well, they didn't back in the 80s, don't share channels, they don't use the same channels. So there's the marketing department busily constructing these lovely stories about fashionability and feminine colors, and nice finishes, and blah, 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 blah. When the reps go out with this storyboard to promote the new models, the middle-aged bicycle retailer in what is essentially a scruffy bicycle repair shop it's perhaps not so much he's not interested, because the pictures of the girls were quite nice. He just didn't get it. He can't relate to it. And yet he's the guy who's going to sell the product for us. But there's no way that the marketing department was listening to the pleas and cries for help from the sales guys in how to penetrate, how to persuade the shopkeepers to buy the product. So out of all of the distribution channels available, it was only the big chains, the likes of the John Lewis Partnership, that were actually promulgating the product story on women's bikes. Just couldn't get it into the marketing department. Yeah, this is our story. We've invested a lot. This has got to happen. Okay. All right. Another digression. All right, so what do we got? Well, if we have to speak of knowledge, then it's a justified and, for us, true belief. That's all you can say about it. Remember, knowledge, the set of ideas which govern, if you like, what we do, gives us our reasons why. They are shared, they're talked about. So they are explanations and descriptions. They are conversational pieces. And they are subject to all of the interpretations and other stuff that goes on in a conversation. There are also very, very important tacit forms of knowledge. And these can't be captured, they can't be expressed. Some of them are embodied, they're physical. Sometimes I would ask students to raise their right hand and then ask them, how did you do that? Oh, well, I just put my head up. No, how did you do that? Well, the nerves sent a message to the muscles, and the muscles contracted and pulled up. How did you do that? How did you do that? At the end of the day, there is embodied know-how. In some senses, organizationally, doing this is pretty trivial. But the same kind of stuff goes on in terms of our physical movements, the way we express ourselves. I'm thinking and not thinking because I can't think about the way in which I'm speaking to you, because that's embodied. Also, behind this stuff that we are sharing today, the embrained and encultured know-how. Embrained is to do with your conceptual equipment, so to speak. This is a term Frank Blackler uses, again, his article in Knowing in Organizations. The academic process, the academic enterprise, creates new conceptual frameworks. We call them disciplines. When you grow up, so to speak, in a discipline, you acquire embrained knowledge. Ah, dear, if you don't believe me, well, I don't know how to express this. From my mid-teens, if I had to characterize my embrained knowledge, and through my career in business, I'm more of a social scientist. I suppose I'm really more of a psychologist in terms of my discipline than anything else. All through my life, I have had difficult conversations with my father about my work or my teaching practice, because he was an engineer, and he trained and developed as an electrical engineer at the end of the Second World War. I stress that because digital processing and software engineering was not part of his embrained knowledge, his embrained discipline. Our culture, and I'm going to be a bit naughty for a moment, particularly the religious aspects of our culture, allow us or do not allow us to entertain certain or hold certain presuppositions, to entertain certain worldviews. So, living in the Philippines, you become really aware of the differences between UK and American culture, and the way in which that influences people's thinking and even language patterns sometimes. And of course, grafted onto that, you've got the local Philippine culture. And within that, actually, because we live almost in the south middle of the Philippines, in the Visayas, you're aware that Visaya culture is different from Tagalog culture in the north. Sometimes I think they're almost like two different nations, countries. They're so different. When you are within a culture, you're not aware of the encultured knowledge, the encultured know-how. When you're within your discipline, you're not aware of the embrained culture know-how. They remain tacit. It's only through comparison, it's only through witnessing and constructing a notion of differences that you might be able to capture some of that tacit form of knowledge, but they're only able to capture a representation of it. Okay, knowledge has three components: the why, the how, and the what. Once it's accepted or justified, it's understood to be the truth. May not be, and probably is not, retested or reassessed. I think it's, for me, it is much, much safer to be thinking that knowledge does not exist. We operate at the level of know-how. So understanding the relationship between knowing how the processes that people are using and their reasoning for those processes, which then informs or indicates to you the dominant logic, the why, and also helps you evaluate the efficacy, the effectiveness of what is being done. Okay. Ooh, look. Recursion is an idea that's core to autopoiesis. A recursive pattern is a repeating pattern. So you can look across the organization and you could see what to do, how to do, and why to do it that way. Authoritarian, authoritative, centralized cultures tend to do this. Yeah. I'm a manager, I tell you what to do. I'm your boss, I tell you what to do. You don't know? This is how you do it. And you do it this way because I said so, because it's proven. It's proven in our organization, this is how it works. So what you do, how you do it, why you do it that way. There's a difference though. Turn them around the other way. Why we want something. And I'm going to suggest to you, this is actually a more, well, this is the strategic view. Why is it we want something? What are the benefits? Are we able to articulate those benefits clearly and relate those to our operating environment as we understand it? What then do we need to do to create those benefits? How is it we create those benefits? Can we understand, identify, install processes which will create those? So this is what we do. We create these processes and we enact what's within that process recipe. Oopsie daisy. Nanaka gives us the concept of bar. And this concept, for me, doesn't exist in our tacit and cultured knowledge. What is it and why is it significant? Why is Nanaka's idea of bar so important? And what does it help us to understand in terms of knowledge, know-how, strategy? How does it contribute to which comes first, knowledge or strategy? Well, look, here it is. Let's start off with individual tacit knowledge and individual explicit knowledge. Why do I want to start here? I want to start here because and for you, we've only got a one-way dialogue because of the technology, because of the medium we're using. A two-way dialogue. I would be seeking to express something, you would be seeking to understand something. In assessing the way in which you feed back to me what you've understood, I would be assessing the way in which I need to respond to enable you to understand what it is that I'm trying to say more easily or more clearly. As we interact, we develop and share in what he calls an exercising bar, tacit and explicit knowledge, know-how. One-to-one, one to a few to a few. These are the areas in Noneka's first Seki modeling of tacit to tacit knowledge sharing, and the process then of trying to recognize what it is that I have tacitly acquired, seeking to make my personal insight, know-how, the knowledge more explicit. Organizationally, this might not be useful. The systematizing bar, combining existing explicit knowledge, and kicking these ideas around to create new concepts, ideas, in the language we were using earlier on, to create concepts that reveal news of difference, or deliver news of difference, given that some of this is about products meeting client need. So how do we service? So a systematizing bar. But this is a different form of conversational or dialogical process. I'm really pausing because the use of information technology is really quite strong, taken for granted in a sense, or seems to be a target of von Krogh and Noneka's writing. Maybe it's my age and my organization experience, but I am skeptical. I'm skeptical of the idea of bar, the idea of enabling new knowledge through information technology. I think you can disseminate processes. I think you can ask questions. I don't think you can develop, I was going to say thrash out, new conceptual combinations, new product group concepts, new insights or understandings, characterizations of client group, client needs. For me, these are still interpersonal processes. Oh, so I have some reservations about information technology and systematizing bar. I have real reservations about information technology in the dialogue bar. But anyway, through the dialoguing bar, to say, look, we've got these new insights, we've got these new ways of thinking, we've got these new ways of forming news of difference. What does it mean? Or yeah, what does it mean? What do we need to look for in the environment? What does it mean we can now do internally in terms of our organizational processes? Transferring that into a tacit form of knowing what to do with our given technologies, our given ways of working, our given asset base, our... And then the originating bar is driving back into the organization, literally as practice. Here again, we've got a conceptually based, probably service-based organization being articulated in this diagram: shared experience, feelings, emotions. But driving back into our manufacturing process, how do we do stuff? Bar. It's, I think what it brings for us in terms of knowledge, knowing, strategy, is to be sensitive to be aware of how we do things and the processes that are around us to enable us to do them. The classic Michael Porter top-down, well, positional, top-down, analyze the environment, find out what it is, choose what you're going to do in terms of your position, reconfigure the organization, manage change to be able to do that. We really, 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 really do not have evidence of that. No, can't say that. Our insights into the interpersonal processes, the dialogical processes, our understanding of the social construction of our reality challenges that beyond belief, challenges that beyond belief. And Bateson, with his how do you know what you know, how do you create news of difference, what news of difference do you react to, are you looking for, the distinctions that you're able to make. In a sense, his challenge, do you know what you're doing and why? These are much, much more significant. I'm, how can I express this? To be honest, I'm really struggling with finding a pithy way of closing this. Now, isn't that strange? What our emerging understanding of the idea of knowledge and knowledge processes, our insight that we should throw away knowledge management, and we should be really examining the way in which we develop know-how in terms of revealing insights into our environment and then operationalizing, doing something with those insights. But how we do stuff, that is strategizing. This original lecture was written way before I discovered, well, I knew the work in some of the work of Chia, but was before the emergence of Chia and Holt. Their how you cope, their notion of everyday coping, their notion of I'm strategizing. Yeah, and their notion of everyday coping. This material, knowing, I think really, really offers us some insight into the way in which organizations are coping. And the issue is to come to understand, come to learn how you improve those coping processes, given in a way that bar is one of the descriptions we have of coping processes. My concern in teaching in the business school had always been enabling the students to cope. I would have conflict sometimes with colleagues because I was less impressed by what was on the list of stuff to teach from the MBA Association, or any other bugger for that matter. I was much, much more concerned with evidence that I could retrieve from my students of how they looked at business. I would send students out on exercises in the city of Nottingham, asking them to tell me, oh, I don't know, how Topshop worked, how John Lewis Partnership worked, how Sainsbury's worked, how IKEA worked. And the way in which they would come back and share with me some notion of the business model, the way in which know-how was expressed in those stores, whether or not they could uncover a theory of shopping associated with those stores. These are the things which would matter to me, not a student's ability to Michael Porter. With that thought, I will go away. I'm not contributing any more to our understanding. I'm just burbling, although I'm enjoying myself with a giggle. Thank you for watching this rather long piece. I hope you enjoyed it or found something of interest in it, even if you didn't enjoy it. Take care. Stay safe. Bye-bye.